Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take what we learned about monopolies and inefficiency, and then we're going to try to fix it. We can use the tools of government intervention to actually eliminate the deadweight loss that exists in market failures such as monopolies. So let's get started. Okay, so the first part of actually lecture 3 is I want to graph the artificial monopolies one more time in break even, in profit and here, and then we're gonna show something called price discrimination in just a moment. So we're going to draw these two graphs of an artificial monopoly and a natural monopoly in profit. And that we're not going to label too much on here because we want to be able to kind of get into the weeds and see what's going on with this when we regulate it. So we have demand. We know that demand's going to tell us the price, and we have marginal revenue. And for an artificial monopoly, we're going to have an upward sloping marginal cost curve. And we know that they're earning a profit. And I'm going to have them earn, I don't know, a whole lot of profit. Let's say, woo, come down, whoop, hit that minimum, come back up again, ATC. And we know that they're producing here at this quantity. And we're going to come all the way up here to the demand curve to say what the price that they're producing at, P sub F and Q sub F. And so they have a huge triangle of deadweight loss. Hopefully you can kind of visualize what that looks like. For their natural monopoly, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to draw it with the downward sloping cost curves. And so we have demand, looks like that. Marginal revenue looks like that. And then we're going to have a downward sloping ATC. And we're going to have a marginal cost curve that also does one of those, right? And there's going to be a huge amount of deadweight loss with that one. Now, marginal cost equals marginal revenue here at Q sub F. And then we're going to go up to the demand curve to find that price. So we go over P sub F. And now we kind of have some options, right? We know that Q, the quantity where they're at optimal, Q opt, right, is there, where supply equals demand. And right here, we know that Q opt is taking place. This is a little bit easier if I can kind of have a chalkboard. That right here, Q opt, where marginal cost equals demand, or marginal cost equals the price is sometimes what it's called. That would be the socially optimal or allocative efficient point. And so sometimes what we can do, right, is we can regulate these markets such that they will actually produce that quantity. And we can do that by actually setting a price ceiling. So the way that a price ceiling would work is if I told this artificial monopoly, hey, buddy, you can't charge P sub F, right? You can only charge the price that corresponds to this optimal quantity. So I'm going to kind of drag that over here and say P opt, right? If they were at P opt, then they would actually occur, like if I told them you can't sell for more than P opt, it actually takes this marginal revenue curve and it flips it on its side right there at P opt. Because it would be like saying if for example, if I only allowed them to charge $5 instead of say 12, which was what their PF would be. Well, then the first unit they sell, they would get $5. That would be their marginal revenue. Second would be $5. Third would be $5 and so forth. And so their new profit maximizing point, because MR would be a horizontal line, would occur where MR equals MC, and it would happen right there. So all by itself, by using a price ceiling and just telling this monopoly, hey, you can't get rich off of kind of the fact that you happen to be the only one who's producing this product, we're going to push down that marginal revenue into being a flat line, and it's going to be where P opt would be. That's the price ceiling. That actually causes them to earn an economic profit. So that's actually this one is what I'm talking about. We create it at the socially optimal price. And so that leads them, right, with actually here, this amount of profit. It's a little bit tricky to see it, but it goes down from that P opt down to the ATC. So this firm still would actually be earning economic profit. Now, if we were to do that with the natural monopoly, we're going to find that the price is actually going to be less than the ATC. And so the firm would require a lump sum subsidy in order to operate. And I'll kind of talk about that more in just a moment. But in essence, if we were to identify the P opt here, well, P opt is a really low value, right? It goes all the way to here. That's our P opt. And at that level, right, ATC is above it. And so they're losing money, and they're losing this amount of money, this kind of long, skinny little rectangle that goes all the way over from price up to the ATC. And so they would require a subsidy in this amount for them to continue to operate. And that's usually not a very politically popular thing, right? So oftentimes monopolies that are like utility companies are not necessarily regulated to the socially optimal, that very, very low price. Now, a pharmaceutical company, right, one that's maybe has a patent or a copyright, you could regulate them actually to that P opt value and get the most amount of surplus and this firm would still be earning an economic profit. So from this firm's perspective, obviously they would prefer to have PF. They would make a lot more profit. You can kind of visualize what that would look like there, but they're still earning an economic profit. Now, for the natural monopoly, though, this would be a big problem, right? They can't continually operate with these losses happening, so you'd have to subsidize them. So sometimes what what governments will do is they'll pick kind of a different option. They'll pick this, what we have option one, which I really kind of should reorder these a little bit. Let me get that second there. This second option is called use a price ceiling at the break-even price, where demand equals the average total cost. Now, for the artificial monopoly, that actually would lead to them producing more units. So this would be their break-even. That would be even more units than Q opt. And so we wouldn't want to regulate this one to break even because it would actually lead to more deadweight loss. So we wouldn't use it, not use break even, right? And sometimes break even is like normal profit. Sometimes is what it's called. Sometimes it's called average cost pricing, and it's basically saying that we're gonna regulate you with the price ceiling so that you don't earn any economic profit. And again, with a artificial, you wouldn't want to even go that far. You don't need to go all the way over to where demand equals ATC. But with the natural monopoly, that kind of represents a little bit of a kind of a midpoint, right? A little bit closer to that Q opt. So this would be Q break even. And I'm going to kind of identify it here. Demand equals ATC. That's the quantity where they break even. And that happens at a lower quantity than Q opt. So you would still have a little bit of deadweight loss in there. You would have a little bit, but you wouldn't have any economic losses. So this firm wouldn't eventually shut down or anything like that. They would just be breaking even. And so sometimes this is considered like the middle ground where we'll regulate utilities to that level because it gets us awfully close to socially optimal. It would still leave us with deadweight loss. And I'm going to kind of show you what that would be using this. If we kind of start with that and come down to the MC and over, you have that really small little triangle. That would be in contrast to the great big one that would be before that, right? That would start right here. So we're getting rid of a lot of deadweight loss by using break-even pricing. But at the same time, we're still leaving a little bit in that regard here. But the nice thing about break-even pricing is, again, you're not subsidizing the firm. You're not providing them with extra money every single time, which we said here is not very popular. So those are kind of two options, right, of solving the deadweight loss problem, of solving the problem that monopolies overcharge and don't produce enough units, because you force them to produce more units. Actually, they're going to increase the quantity of production by using these price ceilings. Now, there are really three other options, right, that I kind of want to briefly talk about. The third option is something called price discrimination. And discrimination doesn't necessarily mean that we're kind of choosing based on race or class or gender. What price discrimination means is that we are discriminating. We're choosing between people, right? We're being a discriminating kind of monopolist. And what that means here is we're charging each customer exactly what they're willing to pay. We're charging different prices for different people. Now, the consequence of that is that the marginal revenue is going to become back equal to the demand curve because each customer is going to get a different price. That means the marginal revenue won't decrease faster than the demand curve. In other words, when we go to draw this graph of a price discriminating monopoly, and I'm going to draw an artificial monopoly for this purpose, we'll have the demand curve and it will actually equal the marginal revenue because every time we sell an additional unit, we have to lower the price, but that's exactly what we get. And we still get the higher price for the previous unit. Lots of companies do price discrimination. They often don't get it perfectly right? They can't do it with every single customer, but lots of companies try. Airlines, for example, will try to do this. They'll try to figure out exactly what you're willing to pay for a flight. And in fact, they use little subtle tricks to try to determine what exactly you're willing to pay. They'll ask you questions like, are you traveling for business or for leisure? Well, they know that a business traveler typically gets reimbursed. And so they don't really care. A business traveler doesn't often care as much as a leisure traveler how much the price is going to be. So if you check business, it might actually show you a higher price for the exact same flight, the exact same seat than if you had checked leisure. Another example of that would be that if you price different things in different currencies, right? So if I'm traveling to, say, Vietnam, and I want to book a flight in Vietnam from, say, one city, Phnom Penh, or from like Thailand to Vietnam or something, in that local area, if I price it in the local currency, then the airline knows that maybe I have a lower willingness and ability to pay than if I were pricing it in dollars. If I price it in dollars, they actually might show me a higher price, even if I take into account changing the currency. That's because they know that Americans probably have a higher willingness to pay for these kinds of flights than somebody who's a local. So they would charge different customers different prices. That's what price discrimination means, and it moves the MR to the demand curve. Now, our marginal cost curve is still exactly the same way it used to be. And our ATC comes down, hits its minimum, and comes back up again. And so the consequence of this is the firm produces where MR equals MC, which is also at the Q opt. So that's QF and it's Q opt, because remember, if we're at demand equals marginal cost, then we actually are where we need to be. The downside of this, well, let me give you one last upside. The ATC, it hits the ATC right here. So we're going to come over and we have this kind of being the bottom of our profit. The profit actually goes all the way up to the demand curve because we're earning different prices for different goods. And so it's this kind of interesting looking trapezoid shape, right? And so it doesn't include the very bottom of that ATC portion, but profit is huge, right? So obviously the firm loves price discriminating. You can see why, because all of that is profit. The downside is if you're charging every single customer exactly what they're willing to pay, customers feel like that's bogus, right? It eliminates all the consumer surplus. It allows extremely high profits for the firm. It solves the problem of deadweight loss. There's no deadweight loss, no deadweight loss, but because we're at Q opt. But the problem is people feel like they're getting ripped off, right? Customers often don't really like that. So from a kind of policymaker perspective, you could solve deadweight loss and the market failure by actually encouraging the firms to do this. And firms want to do it already. So that's kind of like, well, we're getting the right number of transactions, but it makes everybody pay exactly what they're willing to pay. And so they don't feel very good about those transactions. I don't know if your feelings matter in that sense. Two other choices, right? Another option is government ownership. Sometimes we actually just say, rather than deal with this break-even price or this optimal price thing, the government just takes over this entire operation and runs the company. What they will often do in that sense is then they'll price the thing at P opt. They'll go ahead and price really, really low so that we get Q opt. And they just go ahead and pick that price. An example of that would be the Postal Service. The optimal price of a stamp is really, really low, but that means that it's less than the break-even price of a stamp. So the Postal Service, by design, will lose money, right? It's kind of by design. They're a natural monopoly in some senses. Other people, you could argue they're an artificial monopoly. But realistically, a lot of times you'll have these scenarios where the government will just operate it and subsidize it through tax dollars in an effort to essentially manage this market on their own. The problem here is the government's losing money, right? In this, they don't have to subsidy a private company, but they do end up losing money on providing these services. So that's not very popular. Another issue is sometimes these kinds of endeavors, when the government is operating a private business, they're subject to political pressures. So sometimes they'll hire people who maybe shouldn't be hired. And in addition, they have higher average costs. Governments are typically less efficient than the private market at producing goods and services because, again, they're not concerned with profit maximizing. They aren't looking at it and going, how do I make the most money? They're looking at it as, how can I produce the socially optimal quantity at that socially optimal price, which, again, that can lead to higher costs. It leads to less efficiency. So for those reasons, sometimes we choose not to do that option. It really depends on kind of what the given market is, right? The final option here is breaking it up or preventing it from forming in the first place. And so we sometimes will use antitrust laws, which basically are laws that prevent monopolies from forming, or we even break up monopolies and we turn them into different types of market structures. And we'll get to what those are later. So we just say, actually, you can't be a monopoly. We're going to break you up. Now, the last part of this lecture are two things that will not fix the monopoly. And sometimes you'll get questions that ask about this. A per unit tax would not fix any of these problems. What it would do is shift the supply curve, the marginal cost curve, up. And that actually makes the deadweight loss even bigger. So if you imagine here, this marginal cost curve shifting up, it's going to cause the QF to get smaller. You know that from unit one, that a tax would reduce the quantity. Well, by reducing the quantity, you're just making that deadweight loss triangle that was here, you're making it a larger triangle, which is just the opposite of what you'd want to do. The same would happen here. This marginal cost curve would actually shift up and the ATC would shift up, and that would cause there to be a smaller quantity. It would make that deadweight loss triangle get bigger. So the per unit taxes, you wouldn't want to put a per unit tax on a monopoly. It doesn't work. It actually makes the problem worse. A lump sum tax would likewise also not work. It would reduce the profit that the firm earns, but it's not going to cause them to produce Q opt. The thing that would cause them to produce that Q opt, as we talked about just a moment ago, you could get them to price discriminate, which makes people feel upset, or you can use price ceilings at those optimal prices or break-even prices. So hopefully this helped you understanding how we can intervene and fix a market failure. It's the first time that we've talked about markets all by themselves failing, but we can intervene and we can fix that and make society's welfare better off. Hopefully all that helped you. I'll see you next time.